I mean, no more had things gotten together and man and woman were living together and they thought they were getting their life together in their relationship with God, and he was walking in the garden with them. Chapter 3 crops up. In chapter 3, Adam and Eve succumb to the temptation to eat of that tree God told Adam, don't eat from it. Now, in the chronology of things, it appears that Adam was given that instruction before Eve came along. So Adam, as the first created and the head of the household, was responsible that his household would respond to God as they ought to. Eve knew what the instructions were. She tells that serpent who says, has God said you can't eat from any of the trees of the garden? She says, oh, no. Of the trees of the garden we may freely eat, but of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, we are not to eat it or touch it lest we die. Now let me suggest a couple of things to you about that story, because if you've heard that story or seen it portrayed in movies, I would dare say you've seen it or heard it portrayed inaccurately. Eve's statement, the tree that is in the middle of the garden we may not eat, indicates she is not standing under that tree when she's offered the temptation of that fruit. Furthermore, it says that when she ate of the fruit, she gave it to her husband with her, and he ate. So it's not as if Eve has been cut out by Satan for temptation away from Adam. He's standing right there. He watches her eat that fruit. And he recognizes as she eats it, she didn't drop dead. And she says, you gotta try this. I mean, this is good. And he does. And it says their eyes were open and they recognized that they were naked. Now, let me tell you what's significant about that nakedness in this story. Babies run around naked all the time, and not ever will you see them covering their faces saying, I'm so embarrassed. They don't care. You could run a baby across the floor here, and he or she would toddle right across here, butt naked, and nobody would think anything of it, especially the child. But ask for a volunteer adult in this audience to do the same thing, and you won't get any takers. What's the difference? It's partly our awareness that nakedness is no longer innocent. We have thoughts about naked people. And we recognize that there is an intimacy of that nakedness that shouldn't be violated, so we put on clothing. Adam and Eve recognized we're naked. We shouldn't be. They have now become aware because their eyes have been opened to sin and its nature, that this is not good. So they hide themselves. They've made for themselves very inadequate covering in fig leaves. I don't know about you, but I think I would have found a smooth palm frond or an elephant ear plant before I would have gone after fuzzy leaf fig leaves. But they hid themselves. And when God came and said, where are you? Adam said, I hid myself because I was naked. And he says, who told you you were naked? And then becomes the great blame game. Adam says, for the first time, denying the kind of relationship he should have had with his wife, it's her fault. He throws her under the bus. Well, let's put it in context. He throws her under the chariot. There are no buses at this point. He says, the woman you gave me, God, you brought her on this earth. You gave me this woman. She told me to eat and I ate. And then he turns to the woman and says, and you? And she says, the serpent encouraged me. And then when God looks at the serpent, he doesn't have anybody to blame it on. He just takes it. And God offers curses as a result of their sin. It's not a matter of God being so angry that he's going to punish them. It is more a recognition that this is what sin does. Sin separates people from people. Sin separates humanity from the earth. And sin separates man from God. God will no longer walk in that garden with man. He will put a cherubim at the edge of that garden and not allow man to come back into that environment. Adam and Eve probably had to work out that argument they had. She said, well, thank you very much for taking up for me. And he said, well, it is your fault. You're the one that ate us out of house and home. They're going to die. And further, Adam is going to work among thorns and thistles. And the ground will rebel against man, where it had not done that before. Sin brings those kinds of consequences. And it does even to this day. That's chapter 3. In chapter 4, the sin continues. They have a son named Cain. And then they have a son named Abel. And they bring offerings to God, and Abel's offering is accepted, and Cain's offering is not, and Cain gets upset about that, and rises up against his brother, and kills him in his jealous rage because of Abel's position with God. And so he is driven from the area where he was, and goes off to a distant land, and there he begins to procreate his own kind of people, earthy people. Where did all those people come from is often a question that's asked. And while God doesn't give us a definitive answer on that, Adam and Eve are living long periods of time, and they may have given birth to many other children, and even children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren in this time period. So that they're now populating the earth. That was what God said. Be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. Fill it with humanity. And then we come to chapter 6. And in chapter 6, we meet a man whose name is Noah. And Noah has found favor in the eyes of the Lord. He is a righteous man. And you may say, well, there are lots of righteous people. Not in this earth. At this point, things have gotten really bad on the earth. Men are wicked and violent. The scriptures in chapter 6 tell us every thought and intent of man's heart was only evil continually. Now, I realize that's got to be a little bit of hyperbole there. That's a little bit of an overstatement for emphasis. Because what that really says is they couldn't even have a good thought. No one could have a good thought. Nobody wished for anybody a good day. It was only evil continually. Now, while I think there may have been glimpses of good in people, overall, mankind had abandoned God, and God said, I'm going to wipe them out. I'm just going to start over with Noah. He's the good guy. He has influenced his wife and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Their wives are good women, and I'm going to spare them. So, for about 100 years, they worked to build a giant floating vessel called the ark. And when that ark was finished on dry land, and Noah had told the people of his generation, there is a great judgment of God coming, and no one listened. One day, the heavens opened. Water came not only from the heavens, but the ground opened up, and water from the aquifers and the underground areas spurted forth and began to flood the earth. And Noah and his family, and 2 of every unclean animal and 7 of every clean animal went on that ark. And they floated. For 40 days and 40 nights, it rained and flooded the earth. And for 150 days, the waters prevailed and then began to recede. And Noah came forth. Now, in a series of chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, chapter 5 being the genealogy of Adam's race, we've had 3 major rebellions against God. Adam and Eve's in chapter 3, Cain's in chapter 4, the world's in chapter 6. 6, 7, 8, and 9 all deal with Noah and being on the ark and getting off the ark and dealing with his family. And he has 3 sons, and the key son is the one who will give birth to the ancestry of Abraham. We'll meet him in a moment, but there's one more rebellion that has to take place before we're finished. That is the rebellion at Babel. There was a tower on the plains of Shinar that men stopped at and said, hey, this would be a good place to build as a rallying point for all mankind. Remember, God had said to mankind, replenish the earth, scatter, go in every direction, and live. Somebody got the great idea, no, let's consolidate. Somebody had the same kind of concept that a lot of us have today. Big government is better. And so let's bring everybody together. And the tower was meant to extend high enough into the heavens that everybody around would see it and go to it. That if they're walking across a plain, they'd say, look at that over there. That looks like a man-made structure. Let's go see what it is. And it was meant to be a rallying point for man. And God said, not going to let that happen. That is not going to happen here. And so God confused their languages. And I don't know that He gave them the modern languages that we have, but He gave them all different languages to speak. So that one guy passing a brick to the other one suddenly couldn't understand what the other guy was saying to him. No, not that brick, give me another one. What? And they were speaking different languages. And they couldn't communicate with each other, so they couldn't continue building. So the tower remained as it was. And then some of those people found each other. Because I don't believe every person had a different language, but there were language groups. And so the group of people who had the Germanic tongues, to use a modern parallel, all the Germans found each other. You know? They listened and they said, hey, I heard one of them sounds like us. Let's go get him. And they gathered together. And all the Romantic languages, all the people that sounded French, all gathered together. Said, let's go make bread. And then some of the others gathered and they said, I love that long drawl, and I heard somebody say y'all a minute ago. And all the Southerners gathered together and said, let's go eat some greens together. And let's learn how to chicken fry steak. Wouldn't that be good? And so those language groups found each other, and they separated into different parts of the world. And so this is how nationalities came about. This is how people got their ethnicity. And as they moved to different parts of the world, they began to take on traits that were very similar to other people in that section. So some people's hair was darker than others, and some was very light. And some had very light skin, and some had darker skin. And they had their languages, and they had their ethnicity, and they had their nationality, and they began to settle and dwell in different places. Some of those people settled in Mesopotamia. That's in the Fertile Crescent. It's in the very heart of the Middle East. And among those people was a man named Abraham. And we'll talk about him right after this next break. All right, rest easy, stand, shake off the lethargy, and we'll get ready.